know. Do you think writing, I feel like there's more young writers these days, but I could be wrong. Or at least, like, is there more writers than there were back then? And is there maybe like a disconnection with, yeah, the role of like media, for example? And like that we're just not finding people who write. Or maybe, I don't know, writing as a hobby is so hard to come by and it has decreased over time. I actually don't know. But I honestly think like if you ask someone or if you hear someone hears you're a writer, they're like, oh my gosh, you write books? That's so cool. And you're like, yeah.
Yeah.
And they seem to like have never heard of that sort of hobby. They're like, what the heck? Even like reading, I guess it's more popular now. But reading, like, I don't know, could be very similar. But I don't know, what are your feelings on that? Do you think it's increased, decreased?
I would love to see some statistics somewhere, which maybe exist, maybe not. But I I think social media has helped to showcase
Yeah.
just everything in general. And I think with stuff like content creation becoming more common and more young people now wanting to have careers
Yeah.
like be a YouTube creator, we are getting
Yep.
more young people to showcase what they're doing. And it helps that when you have,
Mm-hmm.
somebody start a community, that more people want to join it. So I feel like we're kind of seeing that in the writer tube community, is that more and more people are popping up because they're seeing that, okay, like, people actually want to hear about this. Like maybe a few years ago, not that I
Yeah.
was looking at it as much, so I
Yeah,
can't
I see.
accurately say, but there's like this, I feel like there's this
Hmm.
growth of more people coming on because you'll see so many more YouTubers with smaller subscriber counts, and they're just kind of popping up more and more, which is great because then we're building this community, we're getting more people into the art, and then we're inspiring other people. And then also, these older authors who didn't grow up with social media, like Stephen King was still writing, back when telegrams were still around. I was listening to one of his interviews, and he would
Yeah.
send telegrams for the
Oh,
longest time. Like people at some point, I think, told him like, dude,
wow.
you have to stop sending these. Like no one literally uses this technology anymore. Like the guy was just not up to the
Mm.
idea of using a telephone or something. Like, so I think in that sense, like before, we didn't even really know who writers were unless you were in the community, and the community was very much like going to
Yeah.
cafes, like cafe culture. I was in Prague about a
Yeah.
month ago, and they have a very famous
Wow.
cafe there where Franz Kafka used to hang out with Max Brod, and Einstein used to go there. And
Wow.
that's like where all
Mhm.
the writers used to hang out. And that's kind of how you knew where anybody was. There's a cafe here in Belgrade, that's where I am right now, where Ivo Andrić used to go
Mhm.
to, that's now turned into a restaurant. And
Wow.
that's kind of like how the community
Mm.
was. It's just like you had to be in the city, kind of join the community, and then you would, be there with the other
True.
writers. And I'm kind of like, okay, I would love that. I would love to have like a cafe spot to hang out with people, and we just sit and write and like discuss literature
God.
and science and art. Like, how do I make that happen? So maybe one day in the future, like an in-person meetup or something. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, social media is exposing us to a lot more creatives. It's giving space for that,
Yep.
and it's allowing us to
Yep.
connect internationally, which is phenomenal. But yeah, as for reading, I mean, everyone that when I tell people I write, they're like, "Wow, that's so cool." But then, some of the older people that I talk to, like my parents, my some family friends' parents, like even my my priest at my
Mhm.
church, bless him, I love him. But
Yeah.
they're like, people don't
Mhm.
really read anymore. Like nobody reads books, and I'm like, people read
Yeah.
books. Like I don't know what you guys are talking about. Maybe you guys
Definitely.
don't read
For
books, but
sure.
I've noticed that too.
Yeah.
There's a very common thought
Yeah.
process that
Resurgence.
people just don't read books. Or communities like the self-development community, they're like, read books, but only read self-help books and self-development books. Like I've heard
Yeah.
YouTubers be like, no, no, don't read Shakespeare, like don't read that nonsense. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Books and literacy are known to improve empathy. There obviously are verbal capabilities, our writing capabilities, storytelling. And then you hear like
Mm.
personal branding, and everyone's like, you need to be able to tell a story. You want your brand to tell a story. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, for
guys, the
sure.
best way you're going to be able to see that is from people who write books for a living and literally create an entire story out of thin air. You're
Yeah.
writing a story about yourself as a brand,
Yeah.
like you know yourself. I'm like, imagine writing a story out of literal thin air, out of like neural connections
Yeah.
just firing off at one of another. And I'm like, and so when I hear people say, oh yeah, nobody reads, you don't want to read fiction books, those are useless. I'm like, I want to rip my hair out. I'm like, guys, you're missing out on so much
Literally.
gold. But maybe we can convince the people to read fiction again.
Yes, fiction.
So
It's like a
that's what I'm hoping for
revolution.
anyway.
For
Get
sure.
people
Yeah,
reading again.
stories. Literally. Yeah, because I know you hear like all on TikTok, like the whole like resurgence of like books being trendy to read. But it's all like the Colleen Hoover books or the I don't know, they're interesting. Like yeah, how you're saying about Shakespeare or the classics, like Lord of the Rings. Like those sorts of books are also important and I feel like you can see how they stand through time and like people who write books now gonna stand through time eventually because that's how storytelling works, you know. Yeah, I agree with you totally.
Yeah,
Mm.
well, and books to me, they're depending, a lot of books are written in regards to or in response to like the political structure of the time. A lot of Russian
Yeah.
authors wrote about what was going on during the Soviet Union and, the fall kind of the SARS and stuff. And
Mm.
so it's like it's a very good way of kind of getting um, an idea of what's happening at the time. One of my books that I want to write is it's my nano project right now. Actually, is I'm like looking at stuff that's happening right now in the world, and I'm like, oh, if I were to just
Mm.
push that out, like let's say a couple hundred years, maybe, like what could the world look like? And if anybody reads that,
Yeah,
they might be able to pull out that it's kind of like a social commentary on what's happening right now.
for sure.
So it's really interesting.
Mm.
I think it's really interesting to read those kinds of books, and you kind of get it's like you get a better idea of what was happening at the time historically as well.
Yeah, and you do that through storytelling. Like I
But
remember as you were saying that, sorry, just like the Great Gatsby and how that I guess tells a story of the time and like the social constructs and everything. And I'm like, I remember reading that book and it was so hard to get through, even though it's so short. But I've realized, like, yeah, the reason why we were writing that essay and like doing all this like analyzing is, yeah, exactly what you said. You know, through fiction, even if it's a story, it represents so much more and it represents, time.